thank you so much for joining us today. Would you introduce yourself to us, Mrs. Sprague?
Certainly. I'm Rosetta Douglass Sprague, daughter of Frederick Douglass and Anna Murray Douglass, and I'm happy to be with you today.
Well, we're certainly very familiar with your father, Frederick Douglass, as a great orator and abolitionist and staunch defender of the rights of the downtrodden. But as we all know, there is always, behind every successful man, there is always a strong, supportive woman. And from what we've learned of your father's childhood, we know that slavery allowed no warm guidance of a mother's hand. But your mother, Anna Murray Douglass, though an enigma to outsiders like us, appears to be a true and sacrificing helpmate to the great man. And I wonder if you might like to share some memories of your mother with us?
I certainly would like to share some memories. I'd be happy to talk to you about my mother. I recently published some of my memories of her, as she was extremely dear to me and was definitely a lasting influence on me in my life.
Was your mother born in the same area as your father?
My mother was born in Denton, Maryland, part of Caroline County, an adjoining county to where my father was born.
Ah. Was she born into slavery as he was?
No, my mother was not born into slavery.
Oh.
My grandparents, Barbara and Mary Murray, were slaves, and 7 of their 12 children were born into slavery. My mother was the 8th child and was born 1 month after her mother was freed. The rest of my mother's siblings were born free. I never knew if my grandfather was born. I never knew if my grandfather was freed.
From early on, it would appear that your mother had an independent and industrious spirit. Did she live independently or with her family?
My mother lived with her parents until she was 17. She thought she should be self-supporting and moved to Baltimore, where she was employed by a French family named Montel. She worked for them 2 years. She learned her skills of household management with this family and became a thorough and competent housekeeper. She left the Montels for the Wells family, who lived on South Caroline Street. Mr. Wells was the postmaster at the time of my father's escape from slavery. She lived with the Wells family 7 years until she married my father. My mother was an excellent cook and was known for her Maryland biscuits, a recipe taught to her by her mother. She was the banker of the family, making sure all bills were paid and we had food, clothing, and shelter.
How did she and your father meet?
When my father came to Baltimore to live with the Auld family, he met and socialized with many of Baltimore's free black community, particularly in church. They met and eventually decided to make a life together. Very difficult, given that one of my parents was a slave and not in control of his own life or destiny.
Did she support his plans for escaping slavery? Wouldn't she fear the consequences?
Yes, in fact, she talked about that a lot. My mother was in full support of his plans. Remember, her parents and many of her siblings were formerly enslaved, and she realized that slavery was an unnatural condition for mankind. She wanted her husband to be free, no matter the consequences to herself. She understood that she could be enslaved if he was caught, but she still provided assistance in his escape.
How did she contribute to his escape plan? Did he accept her ideas?
Yes, she was his partner in the escape. Since she had saved the majority of her salary while living in, she provided the funds needed to procure materials to make, and then she sewed the sailor suit my father wore when he boarded the train. She also sold one of her 2 feather beds to raise money for my father's escape.
What was the plan?
My father knew a sailor in Baltimore who agreed to loan him his seaman's protection paper. While the description was not a good match for my father, he decided to take the paper and board the train and buy his ticket on the train, thinking the conductor would be in too much of a hurry to really examine the paper closely. He took the train to Wilmington, Delaware, and then boarded a steamboat to Philadelphia. Once he arrived in Philadelphia, he took a train to New York City, a harrowing 24-hour trip. Once he arrived in New York, my father contacted my mother to meet him in New York.
Can you tell us about their journey?
My parents boarded the steamer John W. Richmond, bound for Newport, Rhode Island. They had to ride on the deck as no colored passengers were allowed to be in the cabins. It was an overnight trip, and the next morning they arrived in Newport. There they found the stagecoach to New Bedford, but weren't sure if they had sufficient funds for the journey. Two Quaker gentlemen saw them and without asking a question said, "Thee get in." Once they arrived in New Bedford, their luggage was held until they could pay the fare. They went to the home of Nathan Johnson, who loaned my father the funds for the fare.
How did they feel about their arrival in New Bedford?
My father and mother spent the early part of their time in New Bedford in a small home, enjoying the fruits of their labor. My father earned his own money that he did not have to share with a slaveholder, and my mother was in full support of his efforts. They found a small African Methodist Episcopal Zion church where they became members, and my father a lay preacher. My father was vested by Reverend Thomas James, who became a family friend and neighbor in Rochester, New York.
Who was Mrs. Johnson where they first went to live?
Mrs. Mary Johnson was the wife of Nathan Johnson. She was commonly known as Polly Johnson. She and Nathan enjoyed a reputation as two of the best caterers in New Bedford. The Johnsons were also very active in New Bedford's Underground Railroad and helped other formerly enslaved families like my parents.
Did they stay with the Johnsons all the time they remained in New Bedford? How long did they stay in New Bedford?
My parents never told me how long they remained with the Johnsons, but I know they moved to the two-room house on Elm Street before I was born in 1839. My father took me to New Bedford in 1890, and I was able to visit my first home on Elm Street. My father and mother spent many hours in quiet enjoyment in this house.
And how long did they live in New Bedford?
They lived in New Bedford at 3 years. Two of my three brothers were born in New Bedford.
Was it a welcoming community? Did your mother feel safe here?
I believe she felt safe as possible during this time of slavery. My father was a fugitive and not legally free at this time, and slave catchers did come north to capture those fugitive slaves. The colored people in New Bedford were very welcoming. There were several colored churches, and New Bedford was known as a safe community for fugitives.
Why did they move to Lynn?
My father built a house for us in Lynn.
Oh.
This was before his autobiography was published in 1845.
How did your mother support herself and you children when your father was traveling and abroad?
After my father left for England, my mother became the breadwinner of the household. She did piecework in the house, binding the tops of shoes to the soles. This was something that women could do in their houses. During this time, she kept careful records of her deposits and contracted no debts. Father was truly impressed by her money skills, something she had learned during her time in New Bedford at the Wells family and at the Montell family.
How did she feel about moving to Rochester, New York?
My father had returned from his trip in England and Ireland a free man. Some of his supporters raised funds to purchase his freedom. He wanted to move to Rochester to be able to publish his own newspaper. Some of his anti-slavery friends had connections in the area and invited him to relocate to New York. My mother believed in the sanctity of marriage and made the move as well. I don't think she was very happy to leave her friends in Lynn, but she didn't really have a lot of a choice. She had that support group in Lynn, but wanted to make the move too, make sure she supported my father.
Well, your mother was known for her hospitality and her homemaking skills. And unlike some of the ladies of our day, she saw this as a profession. Would you care to comment on that?
My mother saw her skills as a homemaker as a way to better herself and our family. She made sure we were all well educated and did not have to support ourselves with menial labor. Homemaking was a skill that was honorable in her eyes. She didn't see it as something less than. It was something that women should aspire to do, and so she did it.
Your father was known to have several female friends and benefactors. How did your mother deal with these influences?
My mother knew the depth of my parents' relationship. They loved each other and had been married a very long time, and understood that society would like to think the worst of my father and his friends. She had the uncanny knack of being able to see into the hearts of others and distinguish the difference between those of goodwill and those of ill will.
Now, you're one of several children of this well-known couple. Could you tell us a little about your siblings?
Certainly, I'd be happy to. My brother Louis Douglas was born in 1840 in New Bedford. Louis worked as a typesetter for both of my father's papers, the North Star and the Douglas Weekly. He joined the 54th Massachusetts Regiment in 1863 and became a sergeant major, the highest position of a non-commissioned officer in that regiment. He was at James Island, Olustee, and Fort Wagner. Louis married Amelia Logan, daughter of A.M.E. Zion Bishop Germaine W. Logan, another New York abolitionist. They met when my family moved to Rochester. My brother was the first typesetter hired by the government printing office, but couldn't join the union because of racial discrimination. My next little brother, Frederick Douglass Jr., was born in 1842 in New Bedford. Frederick eventually entered the publishing field like our father. He served in the 25th U.S. Colored Infantry during the Civil War. After the war, he moved to Washington, D.C. and worked as an associate editor of The Leader. Frederick and Louis published the New National Era in Washington, D.C. And my next little brother, Charles Remond Douglas, was born in 1844 in Lynn, Massachusetts. Charles Remond was named after the well-known abolitionist Charles Remond, who lived in Salem. Charles joined the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, but remained in Reedville, where they enlisted and they had their practice grounds. But he had to stay there because he got ill. He then joined the 5th Massachusetts Cavalry and became a first sergeant. Charles worked in various federal government positions. After the Civil War, he worked as a clerk in the Freedmen's Bureau and the Treasury Department. And then the little baby, the littlest Douglas, was Annie. Annie was born in 1849 in Rochester after we moved there. She was the baby. She died in 1860, and her death left a lasting impact on all of us, particularly my father and my mother.
Losing a child is a traumatic loss to too many of us, I'm afraid. Could you tell us about the death of your little sister, Annie?
It's a sad story, but I'd be happy to share it with you. Annie was very interested in Father's activities in the anti-slavery movement. John Brown was a family friend who visited us in Rochester. After his failed raid on Harper's Ferry, Annie was disconsolate at his death. They had a one-of-a-kind relationship. He had been to our house several times, and Annie loved him and used to always want to be around him. So she fell ill after his death, and doctors could not find a cause for her illness, and it was said that she died of a broken heart.
Oh dear. You also had a disastrous fire up in Rochester, New York. Could you tell us about that horrific experience?
My parents' house in Rochester burnt to the ground on June 2nd, 1872. At that time, I was married to Nathan Sprague. I had married him in 1863 and was a mother to 4 children. The fire began in the barn and jumped to the kitchen. We saved some of my father's papers, but he lost his complete set of his papers, the North Star, the Frederick Douglass paper, and the Douglass Monthly, none of which can be replaced. My mother lost all of her mementos from the early days of their marriage, the items that she brought with her when she left Baltimore to start her life with my father. She never got over this loss, and my father believed this was the work of arsonists.
Now, how did it come to be that the family decided to move to Cedar Hill?
By the time of the fire, my father and brothers were spending much of their time in Washington, D.C., so it seemed the appropriate thing to do. Father had already purchased a house in Washington on A Street. He decided to buy a house that would make Mother happy and also overlook his home state of Maryland. He purchased Cedar Hill in 1877.
The death of a mother is a devastating loss. I hope you won't find it indelicate for us to inquire of her later years and her final illness. But as you've opened a window to this special woman, we're concerned about her through her whole life to the end of her days.
Well, of course, after losing Annie, my mother began having medical problems in the 1850s, beginning with neuralgia. In 1867, she had dizziness in the head and later fainted at the sink. She continued to help me and other family members until 1882. She suffered a stroke in July and was bedridden. Father stayed by her side during this entire time. She declined to the point where she was unconscious for 10 days prior to her passing on August 4th, 1882. Her funeral was very large and took place at Cedar Hill. So many acquaintances sent condolences with stories of my mother. It was very heartwarming. I heard stories I had never heard before, and it was, I can't tell you how wonderful it was to hear about her impact and hear the stories of the Underground Railroad and hear how she made an impact in the anti-slavery movement.
At least that lends comfort.
Yes, it does.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Mrs. Sprague. We appreciate your candor and your very loving testimony.
Well, thank you for having me today. I appreciated talking with you, and it's very nice to be able to share memories of my parents.